I never thought the day would come when my own son, the boy I raised alone, the child I sacrificed everything for, would look me in the eyes on Christmas night and tell me I didn't belong at his table. But what happened after he pushed me away revealed a truth none of us were ready for. Asterisk, I arrived with a small gift, wrapped carefully with the kind of precision that only comes from years of doing things alone. The wrapping paper was a soft red with tiny golden stars, the same design my son used to love when he was a little boy. Every year he would beg me to buy that exact pattern, because he said it made Christmas feel magical. I stood at the doorstep of his house with that memory in my mind. A memory that warmed my heart just enough to fight the winter chill that bit at my fingers. But when the door opened, I felt the warmth disappear almost instantly. My son was the one who opened it, but the look on his face was not the look of a son greeting his father on Christmas. His eyes widened not with joy, but with something closer to discomfort. His smile was polite, stiff, almost forced. A stranger's smile. "Dad, you came," he said quietly, as if my presence was unexpected or worse, inconvenient. I tried to ignore that tone. I pretended not to notice how his shoulders stiffened when I stepped inside, how he only tapped my back lightly instead of hugging me, like he used to. I told myself I was imagining it, like Christmas stress, family gatherings, and the pressure of hosting could make anyone tense. I tried to believe that, really did. Inside, the house looked beautiful, warm golden lights. A tall, decorated tree, garlands draped neatly along the walls. It was everything a Christmas home should be. But the warmth in the room wasn't meant for me. I could feel that before anyone said a word. My daughter-in-law was standing beside the table, adjusting a plate. She glanced at me for less than a second before looking away. That small moment told me far more than words ever could. She didn't smile, didn't walk toward me, didn't offer a greeting of any kind. Instead, she whispered something behind her napkin as soon as I stepped closer. Her lips moved quickly, her eyes flickering toward me as if she didn't want me to know. I was the subject. But whispers have a way of filling even the loudest rooms. Stood there holding the little red gift tightly in my hand, the same hand that once held my son's tiny fingers as I walked him to school, as I helped him cross roads, as I wiped his tears. The same hand that worked day and night for years so he never felt the absence of a mother he lost too young. I wanted this visit to be like old times. I wanted him to say, "Dad, you made it," the way he did when he was small and Christmas was our favorite day. Back then, we had traditions. I'd cook breakfast, he'd decorate the tree, and at night, we'd watch the same movie every year, a movie he claimed he was tired of but always asked to put on anyway. But standing in his living room now, I felt like an outsider in the very place I hoped would feel like a second home. I walked toward the dining table, still clutching the gift. The table was beautifully set, white plates with golden rims, folded napkins shaped like little Christmas trees, shiny cutlery. There were 6 seats, 6 perfect places, and one of them was empty, the chair closest to my son's seat. My chair. The one he always set aside for me, at least. That's what I thought, but the moment I moved toward it, I heard the whisper again, this time sharper. "Why did he come?" my daughter-in-law muttered. He said she didn't finish. She didn't need to. The rest of the family pretended not to notice. Each one, suddenly very busy, with something straightening plates, adjusting cutlery, pretending to check their phones. It was as if my presence required everyone to look anywhere except at me. My son didn't introduce me to anyone new. Didn't say, "This is my dad." Didn't place a gentle hand on my shoulder like he used to. Just stood there, watching me walk toward the empty seat with an expression I couldn't read: guilt, annoyance, embarrassment. I sat down slowly, trying to ignore the tension that sat heavier than the cold air outside. I placed the red gift beside my plate, hoping maybe, just maybe, it would bring a smile to my son's face. Remind him of something warm between us, but the quiet hurt inside me grew louder with every passing second. I had felt it before, in small moments. Missed calls, unanswered messages. Holidays celebrated without an invitation, but I always told myself he was busy, that he still cared, that he still needed me the way he once did. Maybe I lied to myself, because the truth was too painful to admit. As I looked around the table, everyone avoided eye contact. It felt like they were waiting for something, for him to say something, for me to do something wrong, for an invisible moment to unfold. And in that silence, the hurt I kept buried for years began to rise. I remembered the nights I worked double shifts so my son could have good shoes for school. The days I skipped meals so he never had to. The times I stayed awake through the night when he had fever. The mornings I walked him to the bus stop in the freezing cold. The afternoons I cheered for him, even when no one else showed up. The years I carried both the roles, father and mother, on shoulders that were already tired, but none of that seemed to matter now. Not here, not today. Not at this table. Instead, I sat quietly, watching the family I once dreamed of being part of treat me like a guest they didn't remember inviting. My son stood a few feet away, whispering with his wife, both glancing at me with growing frustration, as if my presence was an inconvenience rather than a blessing. And in that quiet, I finally admitted something to myself. I was no longer part of his world, not the way I used to be, not the way I hoped to be, and not the way a father should be. The hurt settled deep inside me, not sharp, not sudden, but slow and heavy, like snowfall piling up silently on a forgotten path. And because I didn't want to ruin his Christmas, I forced a smile, swallowed my pain, and said nothing, because that's what fathers do. They endure the hurt their children will never understand. I stood beside the chair, the same chair I had sat in every Christmas since my son bought this house, trying to act like everything was normal. I even brushed the seat gently with my hand, like I always did. A small habit I'd picked up from years of treating this place with care and respect. But the moment I lowered myself into the chair, something happened that I never imagined in even my worst dreams. A hand clamped around my forearm. Not a gentle touch, not a guiding hold, but a firm, unyielding grip. I looked up, confused, and saw my son standing over me. His jaw was tight, his eyes cold, his brows drawn together as if my sitting there was a deliberate insult. "Dad," he said under his breath, his voice sharp enough to cut through the chatter in the room. "Get up." I blinked at him, trying to understand. Maybe he wanted to adjust the seat. Maybe he wanted to say something in private. I tried to give him every possible excuse in my mind, because the alternative that he was genuinely upset with me for sitting there felt too cruel to accept. But his grip tightened, and the look in his eyes told me this wasn't a misunderstanding. "This seat is for my father-in-law," said louder this time, as if he wanted everyone to hear it. The words felt like a slap. My chest tightened. My breath caught. A strange ringing filled my ears. I felt the room shift around me, the laughter dying down, the clinking of glasses fading into silence. Every head turned toward us. Every pair of eyes watched, but no one spoke. No one moved. No one defended me. I tried to rise slowly, hoping he would let go of my arm once he saw me cooperating. But instead, he shoved my hand off the table and pushed me back, not hard enough to throw me, but hard enough to send a message. A message I never thought my own son would give me. My knees buckled slightly and I caught myself on the edge of the chair. For a moment, I stood there frozen, looking at him, searching for an apology in his eyes. I searched for regret. I searched for the little boy I raised, the boy who used to run into my arms after school, the boy who cried when he scraped his knee, the boy who begged me not to leave his bedside when he had nightmares. But the man in front of me wasn't that boy anymore. He looked like someone who wanted me gone. "Dad," he said again, irritation dripping from every syllable. "Please don't make this awkward. Move. This seat is reserved. Served." The word echoed in my mind. Reserved for someone else. Served. At a table I helped him build. Served. On a holiday I taught him to cherish. Reserved. A night that used to belong to us. I stepped back slowly, my hands trembling slightly. The room was unbearably quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. His wife avoided my eyes. Her father, the man whose seat I had mistakenly taken, shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. He looked at the tablecloth, at his plate, anywhere but at me. The rest of the family sat frozen, eyes wide, mouths slightly open, pretending to be neutral observers, even though each one of them had heard the tension in my son's voice. I stood beside the chair, unsure where to go. There were no other empty seats. The table was full, every place occupied, every corner taken, except the chair I had been pushed from. My son gestured toward the far corner of the room. Just sit somewhere there. We'll arrange something. Later, somewhere there. Not sit with us, Dad. Not let me fix another chair for you. Not, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. Just a vague direction, as if I were a burden to be stored away. A wave of humiliation washed over me so intensely that for a moment I thought I might faint. My face burned, my ears rang, my hands felt like ice. I looked at the people around the table, people I had greeted, smiled at, tried to make conversation with, yet all of them stared at me like spectators at a theater, unsure whether to feel pity or relief that it wasn't happening to them. My son's grip still lingered on my arm, the pressure of his fingers burning like a bruise that had not yet formed. It wasn't the physical push that hurt, it was the meaning behind it. I was being pushed out of his life, out of a place I once belonged, out of a seat that should have always been mine. I swallowed hard, forcing down the ache rising in my throat. I didn't want to ruin his night, didn't want to cause embarrassment, didn't want to create a scene that his wife would hold against him later. So, like countless times before, I chose silence over confrontation. I took a small step back and whispered, I didn't know. I'm sorry. My voice cracked halfway through. I prayed no one heard it, but they did. Everyone did. And still, they said nothing. My son pulled the chair closer to his father-in-law and helped him sit down as though he were the most important person in the room. He smiled at him, served him food, laughed awkwardly as if trying to erase the uncomfortable moment. That had just occurred as I watched them. A strange realization settled into my bones. I had become a guest in my own son's life. A guest he didn't plan for. A guest he didn't really want. I moved to the corner of the room quietly. There was a small stool near a side table, wobbly, low, and uncomfortable. I sat on it anyway, trying to make myself as small as possible, as invisible as possible. Maybe if I made less space, I'd be tolerated. Maybe if I didn't speak, I wouldn't be a problem. From my place in the corner, I could see everything. I saw the way my son leaned toward his father-in-law, eager to impress him. I saw the way my daughter-in-law looked relieved that the situation was handled. I saw the way the others shifted plates and continued conversations as if the moment had never existed. Not a single person asked if I was okay. Not a single person offered me a seat nearby. Not a single person said, "He's your father, he deserves a place at the table." And maybe that was the most painful part of all that. An entire room full of people agreed, in silence, that I did not belong. As the dinner resumed in the room, filled again with laughter and clinking glasses, I sat quietly in the background. The stool creaked beneath me. My hand stayed folded in my lap, resting on the small red gift I had brought. A gift no one had even asked about. A gift still unopened. A gift that now felt foolish to have brought. I stared at my son, the man. Raised, the man I'd give my life for, and for the first time, he looked like a stranger who had just pushed me away. A stranger who didn't see my worth. A stranger who didn't remember the man who shaped his entire life. The room was loud again, filled with warmth, filled with chatter. But for me, everything was silent, empty, broken. And in that silence, a part of my heart finally cracked. I sat on the small wooden stool in the corner of the room, trying to hide the trembling in my hands. The dinner had resumed, as if pushing me away from my seat was nothing more than a minor inconvenience quickly corrected. My son laughed with his father-in-law. His wife poured him wine. Plates were passed, stories were shared, and I sat silently on the margins, pretending not to exist, but something inside me was break, kindly, piece by piece. Piece by piece. I looked at the floor, afraid that if I lifted my head, someone would see the shame in my eyes. I didn't want to give them even that satisfaction. I held the small red gift tightly in my hands, my fingers gripping it, as if letting go would mean surrendering the last piece of dignity I still held. For a few minutes, the world moved without me. Then something happened. A loud, sudden crack echoed across the table. A hand slammed down so hard that the plates rattled. The cutlery jumped, and everyone stopped mid-sentence. My head shot up. It was him. My son's father-in-law, the man whose seat I had taken. The man my son supposedly respected so deeply. The man whose presence mattered more than mine, at least to my son. He stood up slowly, his face dark with anger, his palm still rested on the table, fingers spread, knuckles white. The room froze. "What?" he growled. "Is the meaning of this?" My son blinked. Confusion washed over his face. "Dad?" My daughter-in-law whispered nervously to her father, but he didn't answer. Her. His eyes were locked on my son, burning with disappointment so sharp it silenced the entire room. "You don't treat your father like this," he said, voice trembling with fury. "Not in my presence, not anywhere." Every word hit the air like a hammer. My son's face turned pale. His wife stiffened beside him. The rest of the guests glanced at each other with wide eyes, suddenly realizing that this moment, this humiliation of mine, was not something to quietly ignore. The father-in-law took a step forward, pointing at the empty chair, the one meant for me. "This seat," he said firmly, "should have been for your father, your real father." My son swallowed hard. "Dad, you don't understand." "No." The father-in-law raised his hand sharply. "You don't understand." He turned his gaze toward me, and in that moment something unexpected happened. His hard expression softened, his voice lowered. His eyes, kind, regretful, met mine with genuine sorrow. "This man," he said, pointing at me, "should have been treated with respect the moment he stepped into this house." My breath caught in my chest. No one had defended me for years. Not like this. Not this strongly. Not this loudly. He faced my son again, and now his anger was unmistakable. "I've heard many things from you," he continued. "Stories about your success, your struggles, your achievements. But not once did you mention the truth about what this man did for you." My daughter-in-law looked confused. "What truth?" she whispered. The father-in-law took a deep breath, then spoke slowly, each sentence striking the table. "Like a moral verdict? Do you know," he said, turning to her, "that your husband's father raised him alone? That he worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep food on the table? That he went to work sick, exhausted, half-alive, because he didn't want his son to feel motherless and homeless?" My daughter-in-law's eyes widened. She looked at her husband. He didn't look back. "Do you know," the father-in-law continued, voice trembling with emotion, "that this man once walked miles to bring your husband medicine in the middle of the night, because there was no transport and no one else to help? That he sold his wedding ring, his wife's ring, so your husband could pay his university fees?" My breath hitched. I never told anyone that story. Not even my son. I only did what I had to do. The father's sacrifices weren't meant to be displayed, they were meant to be felt. But my son's father-in-law knew, because years ago, when my son first asked for his daughter's hand in marriage, he had offered the man some version of his life story, just not the full one. But the father-in-law had gone deeper. "Your husband told me bits and pieces," he said to his daughter, "but I asked around. I learned the truth, spoke to people who knew him growing up, people who saw what his father went through." He turned to my son again, this time with disappointment etched clearly in his face. "Why didn't you tell your wife?" he asked quietly. "Why didn't you tell her who your father really is?" My son looked down. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Humiliating. His wife stared at him, shocked. She had never heard any of this. "Is this true?" she whispered. My son's lips parted, but no words came out. He knew it was true. He knew he had never shared the sacrifices. He knew he had let me become a shadow in the life I built for him. The father-in-law shook his head slowly. "I thought," said, voice cracking slightly, "that you were a man who honored the people who made you who you are." I thought you understood gratitude." He glanced at me again, his eyes filled with respect that I had never asked for, never demanded. "Sir," he said gently, "if anyone deserves a place of honor at this table, it is you." The room was silent, a quiet that pressed against my chest like a weight. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know where to look. For years, I had learned to swallow my hurt, bury my sacrifices, and accept whatever space I was given, even if it was a corner stool far away from the world. But at that moment, someone finally saw me. Someone finally spoke for me. Someone finally acknowledged what I thought had been forgotten forever. My son stood frozen, his face red, his hands shaking. He had no comeback, no justification, no arrogance left. "I'm ashamed," the father-in-law said plainly. "Not of him." His eyes landed on me, "but of you." The words were a slap harder than anything I'd felt earlier. My son lowered his head, unable to look anyone in the eyes. The father-in-law stepped aside from his chair, pulled it out, and looked at me. "Sir," he said softly, "please take your rightful seat." The entire table watched. Not one person dared to whisper now. Not one person looked away. I held the red gift in my hands and stood slowly, muscles stiff from both the cold and the humiliation. My legs felt weak, but something inside me, something old and wounded, stood tall. For the first time that night, I didn't feel invisible. As I walked back toward the table, every step felt like reclaiming something I'd lost long ago. My dignity, my place, my worth. But the moment I reached the chair, I saw something I wasn't prepared for. My son's eyes filled with tears he could no longer hide. As I reached the chair that had always been mine, until tonight, my son's body stiffened. The entire room waited, the tension thick enough to feel on the skin like a dense fog settling around us. His father-in-law's words still hung in the air like a judgment no one dared question. But as I touched the back of the chair, ready to sit quietly, pretending none of this had left a wound, something unexpected happened. My son stood up. He didn't rise calmly. He didn't rise confidently. He rose like a man whose legs were barely holding him together. His breath shuddered. His fingers trembled on the edge of the table. And when he opened his mouth, no words came out, only a soft, broken sound. The sound of someone whose entire world had just cracked open. Then the tears came. Not the polite, controlled kind. Not the kind someone wipes away immediately. But heavy tears he had spent years swallowing, hiding, burying under layers of pride, ego, and the desire to appear like a man who needed no one. He pressed both hands against his face, shoulders shaking, body curling inward as if a part of him had finally decided it could no longer hold the weight of the truth. The room watched. Stunned, my daughter-in-law covered her mouth, her eyes wide. Her parents exchanged glances, surprised, confused, aching. The guests froze, forks suspended in midair, and I just stood there, unsure whether to comfort him, unsure whether I was even allowed to anymore. Years of being pushed aside had taught me caution. I didn't want to misstep. I didn't want to approach my own son and be told to step back again. But before I could decide, he looked up at me. His eyes red swollen, met mine with a guilt so deep it made my heart ache. "All over again, Dad," he whispered, voice cracking violently. I'm so sorry." The confession slipped out like it had been trapped inside him for years. He took a shaky breath, wiping at tears that kept falling faster than he could control. "I wasn't ashamed of you," he said louder this time, forcing the words through the tightness in his throat. "I was ashamed of myself." My fingers loosened on the back of the chair. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. "What do you mean?" I asked softly. He swallowed hard, his entire body trembling. "I wasn't distancing myself because I didn't love you," he said, chest rising and falling unevenly. "I was distancing myself because everything I am, everything I have, everything I've achieved," he paused, trying to breathe. "It's all because of you. I couldn't handle that. I didn't want anyone to think I was weak, that I needed help to become who I am today." His voice cracked again, But I did need help. I needed you. I always needed you. Silence spread across the room. Not the cold silence from before, but a different kind, heavy with emotion. Hanging between every heart present, my son ran a hand through his hair, frustration and regret mixing on his face. When I married, he continued, I wanted to look strong, independent, like a man who built himself. I thought if they knew how much you sacrificed, how much you carried for me, it would make me look small. His father-in-law's eyes softened with understanding, though his disappointment remained. My son looked at his wife then, his face drenched in guilt. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to think I came from struggle. I didn't want you to pity me or think less of me. His wife shook her head slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. Why would I think less of you? She whispered. He didn't answer, simply turned back to me. I thought pushing you away would make me look like a man who stood on his own 2 feet. His voice dropped. But all it did was show how weak I truly was. The words pierced my heart, not because they were painful, but because they were honest, painfully, brutally honest. He stepped away from the table, moving toward me with slow, unsure steps as if every inch he walked was a battle between shame and love. Dad, he said again, voice trembling, you deserved better. You deserved respect. You deserved the seat at the table and the place in my life. I opened my mouth to speak, but emotion clogged my throat. I had waited years to hear anything close to this, years of quiet hurt, years of wondering where I went wrong, years of hoping he would look at me the way he used to. Now he was looking at me exactly like that, like the little boy who once clung to my leg when he was scared, like the teenager who cried on my shoulder after failing an exam, like the young man who promised he'd take care of me when he became successful. He took one last shaky breath. I pushed you today because I was trying to protect my pride, but all I did was break your heart. Tears slipped down my cheeks. Without permission, my son stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time in years. Strength doesn't come from ignoring your roots, he said, repeating his father-in-law's words with a softness that made the whole room still. Strength comes from honoring them. He stepped closer. And I haven't honored you, not once, not in years. I shook my head slowly, unable to let him hold all the guilt. You're my son, I whispered. You don't owe me anything. He did something I wasn't prepared for. He dropped to his knees right there, in front of everyone. A grown man, successful, respected, admired, kneeling at the feet of the father he had forgotten. Gasps filled the room. My daughter-in-law cried openly. Even her mother covered her face, overwhelmed. My son took my hands in his, gripping them. With desperation, no, he said through tears. I owe you everything, and I've been running from that truth for far too long. He pressed his forehead to my hand. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. My heart shattered, not from pain this time, from love raw. Unfiltered, resurrected. Slowly, with trembling hands, I lifted his face. His tears wet my palms, and then something happened that neither of us expected. He leaned forward. Me, tight, ferocious. Like a man who realized he had almost lost the most important person in his life. I wrapped my arms around him, feeling the weight of years finally lifting, misunderstandings dissolving. Distances closing, wounds healing. For the first time in so many years, I felt my son again. He cried into my shoulder. I held him like I used to. And the entire room watched, not with judgment, but with something close to reverence. It wasn't just a hug. It was a return, reconciliation, rediscovery of the bond we both thought had faded. When he finally pulled back, eyes red but heart lighter, he whispered, please, sit at the table with me. This time, his invitation wasn't an obligation. It wasn't politeness. It wasn't for show. It was a son's plea to reclaim what he had almost lost. And as I took my seat, my rightful seat, the whole room felt different. Warmer, softer, united. Because that night wasn't about food, chairs, or Christmas dinner. It was about truth coming to light. Hearts learning to speak. father and son finding each other again, and for the first time in years, the seat felt like home.